Welcome to Modern Financial Wellness, the podcast dedicated to helping you feel better about your finances. I'm your host, Jim Grace, and I'll be your guide as we discuss the psychology of money and explore the emotional aspects that shape our financial decisions and how we feel about them. A quick note before we start, although I do hope that you find the information on this show to be helpful, in no way are any of these discussions to be taken as specific financial advice. Please do your own research and talk to your own advisors, especially when making important financial decisions. All right, Derek Hagen, thank you for joining me, Modern Financial Wellness. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so obviously we're going to talk about applying mindfulness to our day-to-day and to our financial lives. And I guess before we get into some of the practical use and the how-to, you and I obviously had a longer conversation about what mindfulness is and isn't. And we can reference the Financially Mindful podcast. We'll link to that. If people want to check out what, as a starting point, what is mindfulness, there is a conversation between the two of us and Dan that exists. But would it make sense to just review some of those areas of mindfulness as a refresher? You know, what are we going to be talking about today? What are the areas of mindfulness that we should be aware of to kick us off?
Great point. And so when we think about mindfulness, there is, if you ask 10 people, you're likely to get 10 answers. The common thread through those answers are going to be being present, being in the present moment. Okay, but what does that mean to be in the present moment? So often when I talk about mindfulness, it's helpful to talk about what mindfulness is not. So mindfulness is not a way to relax. That might be a side benefit, but it's not a relaxation tool. It's not religious. It does have its roots in, say, Buddhism and some other religions, but it in itself is not a religious technique. It's not a way to stop your thoughts. It's not a way to change your thoughts. So, and it's also not a way of just being a doormat and letting things happen to you, avoiding planning for the future. So those are some misconceptions that people have. So when I talk about mindfulness, I generally use some different kind of spokes, sort of, if you will. So some terms that are helpful to learn about are automaticity or automatic patterns, default mode. This is when we're on autopilot. And I often speak about the subconscious versus the conscious mind, right? So Daniel Kahneman wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which was kind of a culmination of his research on how the mind works. And he uses system 1 and system 2. But this kind of split brain goes back to the ancient times. So basically what it means is that the subconscious mind, this is automatic patterns. There's an analogy I use with an elephant and a rider. So the subconscious brain is kind of like an elephant, and it makes 90 to 99, call it 95% of your daily decisions, like to decide to sweat or decide to blink. You don't need conscious awareness of these things. So it can take over for that. So it's good. This is not to say that we don't want to have automatic patterns, but often in modern life, we can find that more important things have become automatic, which we don't really know that we're doing them. So automatic patterns is a way to think about this. So sitting on top of this elephant in this analogy is a rider. And the rider is kind of like your conscious brain. This is deliberate. This is system 2, if you're a Daniel Kahneman fan. It's more deliberate. It thinks about things. It takes a little bit longer, but that's by design. It's actually trying to weigh pros and cons or figuring out what the best decision is. This is the part of your brain that thinks about the future. The elephant, the subconscious part of your brain, is about survival, and it doesn't know anything other than now. The rider gets to plan for the future, so it can play out these various scenarios. If I do this, then that's likely to happen. If I do that, then this is likely to happen. So consequences.
And one comment I think worth noting on system 1 and 2, the rider, the system 2, the more thoughtful part of our brain, it takes a lot of energy, or burns a lot more energy when you're using that system, which is, maybe worth noting. If we're going to relate this to a financial conversation, making big financial decisions can be draining in a lot of ways. So, maybe we'll touch on that as we move along. But I think worth noting that system 1 should be easy and quick, and automatic if it's aligned appropriately. But system 2, we need to, give it the space it requires to make thoughtful decisions. So just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, 100%. And this is a good system in normal times. The rider ultimately has control. The conscious mind ultimately has control. It can control the impulses of the subconscious mind of the elephant. We're still at risk, so we can train the elephant. If you remember driving, when you first drove, you might have been freaking out. What do I do with my feet? And I have all these things around me. I've got levers and wheels and buttons, and I don't know what you're doing. That was the rider was driving the first time you drove a car.
And now
eventually now you do it with miles and forgot that you drove. You're listening to podcasts, you're having conversations with people. The rider has given that job to the elephant so that we can train the elephant. But there is still a risk though. The risk is we're letting the elephant do important things like alleviate stress by shopping, for example. I didn't really think about doing that. I didn't plan on doing that. I just did it. That's the automatic pattern. So automaticity is kind of the root, the core that runs through this mindfulness stuff. It's bringing more awareness to the rider.
Yeah, and it's designed to be helpful, but can be harmful if we're not aware of what's happening and which system we're using and how we're kind of taking care of the stresses or anxieties. So that's great.
Yeah. So then the next spoke or the next kind of element that I think is useful to learn is the difference between awareness and attention. So awareness, becoming aware of something. This is the bigger umbrella, the bigger circle. Awareness is basically everything that can be noticed. If you want to get esoteric, some people call this consciousness. It's anything that can be noticed is in your awareness. Attention is a subset of that. It's what you're actually paying attention to. So to define the term with the term, it's what you're actually noticing. So you can think of it like a spotlight. Attention is the spotlight within awareness. And we can only pay attention to so many things, or like a small subset of things. So if I'm paying attention to my negative thoughts about some fear about the stock market, I'm not paying attention to, say, my family at dinner or something like that. You can't really divide your attention, or if you think you are, it's actually bouncing back and forth between the two. You can't really pay attention to multiple things, at least effectively anyways. So that's awareness and attention and meditation, which is, we'll talk about later, the difference between meditation and mindfulness. Meditation is practice for becoming more mindful. So meditation, formal meditation, well, let me further define that. Mindfulness meditation, there's multiple kinds of meditation. Formal practice in mindfulness meditation is training your attention. It's training the hand that holds the flashlight. So when you start doing this, they call it an anchor, but it's the thing that you're going to pay attention to. And it's usually your breath, because the breath is always there. It doesn't have to be your breath. As you get more training, you can pay attention to anything in awareness. But you learn by paying attention to, say, my breath. You learn that your mind is a crazy place. They call it the monkey mind, because it's like a monkey swinging back and forth all over the place. And then when you notice that your mind has wandered, you've become lost in thought, you just bring it back to the breath. And you bring it back to the breath over and over again. You're training your attention in this way. You're not trying to stop those thoughts. You're not trying to eliminate thoughts. You're not trying to change your thoughts. You're just being more, you're noticing your thoughts.
Yeah, and to click in on that a little bit, I like the way you describe it as practice. So if I'm hearing you correctly, as a concept, awareness and attention, I think of the multiple tabs that I have open on my screen, my surroundings distracting me. I work from home, so I'm aware that there's dirty dishes that I need to take care of downstairs. I'm not necessarily focusing my best attention on any one particular task. And meditation can be a tool to practice how to alleviate some of that and become better at focusing our attention and potentially less distracted and have control of that monkey mind.
Yeah, well said. And mindfulness practice or a meditation practice is another way to say it, just to add another definition, is it's training you to be less distracted, because you can almost think of being distracted as not having control of your attention. Or I'm supposed to have my attention over here and my attention is off somewhere else. Another name for that is being distracted. So training ourselves to be less distracted. If we, other terms or other, components of this mindfulness stuff is two related terms. There's this acceptance component. So one common definition of mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment and accepting whatever shows up in awareness and consciousness. Accepting is to say some version of this is how it is, or it is what it is. Right now, this is how it is. Doesn't mean that you like it. It just means that you're not wishing it was different right now. You can still work your actions today, right now. You can work to change your situation, but right now you're accepting, that the milk is spilled. They said don't cry over spilled milk. Once the milk is spilled, can you accept that this is something that's a problem you have to deal with now? Instead of wishing that, well, I wish the milk didn't spill. Of course you wish the milk didn't spill, but it's right there and it needs to be cleaned up. So acceptance is about accepting what's happened and then working towards making it better if you want to.
And what's the opposite of that? And why is it potentially negative? So if I wish my financial situation was better, or I wish I hadn't done X, Y, or Z, or, you hate the fact that you're in credit card debt, or whatever the case might be, is it just that that mentality is not useful and doesn't serve you? Or is there something to like that mind frame that we need to make sure we're getting to acceptance to get ourselves away from, some kind of trait or behavior that's negative? Is there's something to that?
Yeah, and I would say the closest to the opposite is judgment, judging your experience as good or bad instead of just accepting as it is. So non-judgment is kind of like acceptance. They're very similar. Now, if I have these thoughts that I hate that I'm in debt, or I have these thoughts that I wish I made more money, or I wish I had a better job, you can use those and set some kind of a goal or a system to work towards. So this isn't useless information. Where it becomes a problem is if you start to ruminate and you get so upset with yourself because I can't accept my position in the world. Until you accept your position in the world, or how things have happened, until you acknowledge this is where you are, it's going to be difficult to move forward. If it's helpful, I have a story that I like to use to differentiate between judgment and acceptance.
Yeah, by all means.
Jazz is a type of music where it's almost the opposite of reading sheet music. These musicians are basically having conversations with their instruments. And there's a legendary trumpet player, Miles Davis, who he's one of the greats. He was on tour with a piano player named Herbie Hancock. And I saw an interview with Herbie Hancock about a tour that they were on. And it's the kind of show where the set list is going to be different every night. But even if it's the same set list, it's going to be a different show because they're just having a different conversation with these instruments of theirs. Herbie was saying that he was just laying down a very basic melody for Miles to do his solo. And in Herbie's words, he screwed it up. It wasn't even close. He hit the wrong keys. I don't know if he was just, his hands were in a different spot of the keyboard where he thought it was or whatever. But he said in his head, I thought, oh my God, I just ruined this guy's solo. I ruined the song. Probably the whole entire show is going to be ruined. I ruined the tour. Everything's the worst. And we can talk about worst case scenarios and our tendency to go to the worst case scenario, negativity bias. So we'll circle back to that. So he suffered from this negativity bias. This is the worst. I just screwed this up. I'm so stupid. And then he said, Miles Davis, he took my mistake and he made it sound like that's what we tried to do. I couldn't figure out, he says, I couldn't figure out how he did that. It took me years to figure it out. The difference was that I judged the mistake and he accepted the mistake. So the difference between these two is Miles just took, here's what is, here's what happened. Now that I know what's happened, I can make the best decision going forward. I can accept, maybe I didn't like it. We wouldn't do it again. We wouldn't do it on purpose. But once it happened, I have to accept that that's happening. And now I got to do the best
Yeah.
I can moving forward. The opposite
Yeah.
being judgment, where I'm calling myself, I'm
Right.
really hard on myself.
I did something bad. You're beating yourself up. You're kind of ruminating in that situation. And
Mhm.
all the while you're just literally not getting to your starting point of taking some action, taking your first step towards solving your problem. You're just kind of sitting in it. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And then the similar is identification. This one's kind of probably the most advanced, but when we identify with something, it feels like it's a part of us. It represents who we are. So you might know professionals like a doctor. That being a doctor is part of my identity, or whatever my job happens to be becomes part of my identity. In the financial world, it's common for us to see people struggle with retirement because they stopped working. And if they've identified with their profession, it feels to them like they've lost a part of themselves.
And I've
Now, to take
heard
that
that
further,
identified
people can identify
or
with their thoughts.
described. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say that's been referred to as identity foreclosure, which is foreclosure is a kind of a negative connotation in and of itself, right? So that's a big one.
I like it. Yeah, and that's when you identify with a profession. Now it goes further. People almost by default, part of the automatic patterns we have is to identify with our thoughts. Our thoughts feel like they are a part of us. So I have this thought and that's a part of me. So where that gets into trouble is we've got a lot of thoughts. We have 50, 60, some people say 70,000 thoughts every day. We don't pay attention to all of them. In fact, paying attention, to your thoughts is called thinking. But if we are identified with these thoughts, there's a tendency to believe that they're true. If we can separate, then instead of my thoughts are a part of me, if I can recognize that I am a person, I am Derek, and I have thoughts, and I can choose to pay attention to them or not. That's another thing that mindfulness meditation helps training, but breaking the identification with your thoughts, breaking the identification with your feelings. I am not sad. I am a person who's feeling sad. Subtle difference, but it really makes a big difference.
Makes sense.
And the final piece is just choice, mindful choice. So there is, earlier we were talking about what mindfulness is not. Mindfulness isn't a state of being in a calm, relaxed state all the time. Mindfulness is about making the best choice with the rider, with the conscious part of your brain. So sometimes you're going to have to speak up and take a stand, and you're going to have to shout at somebody. But can you do that on purpose? Can you make the mindful choice to stick up for yourself and stand your ground, or yell at somebody who might be running into the street or something like that?
Right.
Sometimes the appropriate response is to be sad. Sometimes the appropriate response is something that people don't often think of as mindful, but it's a process of making it with your conscious choice.
And I think
mind.
About that as the difference between reacting and choosing to respond. And it's a lot of, what we've talked about with automatic or thinking systems. Are you responding thoughtfully, or is your monkey brain forcing you to react, and you don't even have the time or can't be conscious with how you're acting? And so I guess mindfulness, to summarize all this, is it fair to say that practicing and trying to apply mindfulness is a way to manage all that and just sort it out to make sure when you are operating on autopilot, or you are spending some more time in deeper thought, that those are efficient, that we're doing it at the appropriate time in the appropriate way?
Yeah, 100%. And I like how you brought up reaction versus response. And I often think about two drawings or two blocks, two squares. One's called impulse, the other one's called action, or one's called stimulus and one's called response. When those are close to each other, that's an impulsive decision. That's automatic. That's automaticity. When the stimulus happens and then I respond, or actually in this case, to use the other terminology, I react. It's like a reflex. If I can put space between the stimulus and the response, if I can put space between the impulse and the action, that's becoming a mindful choice. That's becoming a response. I'm choosing an appropriate response. So I've taken it from an impulsive action and I've turned it into a mindful action.
I guess this gets us to the part of the show where it's like, what do we do with this? Right now that we're aware of who we are as human beings, how our brains work, and some of these systems that are in place and sometimes get out of whack, can you help us think about how we might start to apply a mindfulness practice? How do we go about that?
A mindfulness practice in general, or a mindfulness practice applied to our money, or both?
Even better, applied
It can go
to
either
our
way.
money. Yeah. But either way, how would we start? Obviously, this is a show about financial wellness. So if we can intertwine, how do I apply this to my finances? I think there's a lot there, but I'd love to hear from you, your thoughts.
A lot of doors that we could walk through, and
Right.
probably spend a half a day talking about this stuff. But all of those principles can apply to some area of our financial life. One that really jumps to my mind is the acceptance. Can I accept what's going on? And what that means is that humans, people in general, human beings, we almost have this sense that I'm entitled to a life without problems, such that when I have a problem, it irritates me. So shifting our mindset to recognizing that life is a series of problems that need to be solved can make the acceptance piece more likely. So some examples. The stock market. The stock market has ups and downs. Everybody knows this, or most people know this. Certainly people in our profession know this. Stocks go up, stocks go down. There's crashes. Maybe we don't need to use such a crazy term like crash, but there's down markets. I don't know when it's going to happen. When it happens, I don't know how long it's going to last. I don't know how deep it's going to be. I do know that they're going to happen. Sometime between me right now and me at retirement, I'm going to experience at least one downturn, probably several. So I know that. So when it happens, I can accept that it's here. Yep. It turns it from, oh my God, I can't believe that there's a downturn, to, oh, there it is. I knew it was going to be here sometime. If I can have a plan in place, then I know what I'm going to do when it happens, not if it happens, but when it happens. Oh, this is when I need to rebalance, or this is when I need to buy more, or this is when I need to do whatever I talked about ahead of time. But changing the mindset around, okay, it's not if, it's when, that makes the acceptance piece easier. Because when we're right in it, when we're in the middle of a bear market, when we're in the middle of the down market, it feels like the sky is falling. And especially if you're a news junkie, it really feels like the sky is falling because they're selling the bad news to us. That's hard to accept. I don't want this to happen. I don't like seeing my portfolio down. I don't like seeing my stocks drop. I don't want that. That's judging it. That's beating myself up for it. Accepting it, saying, oh, well, this isn't ideal, but I knew this was going to happen, and I got a plan in place. That changes. It changes our mood. It changes our mindset, and it changes our financial health.
Right. And another example in that space that I think about is, you and I are familiar with Sarah Falaw's work in the Next Millionaire Next Door. And one of the concepts in that book about, building wealth over time, you have to be really content with where you're at and not kind of compare yourself to others. So this social comparison or keeping up with the Joneses that we all tend to struggle with from time to time. I think about it when we're talking about acceptance is, yes, I wish I might be in a different financial situation, but I accept where I am at, right? We're doing the best with what we can. And, we have a lot of opportunities moving forward. I think about it there as well, so just another example.
Yeah, I love that. And the social comparison piece is huge. If you're on audio only, you won't see this, but right behind me, there's a picture of one of my sketches of a guy pushing happiness up social comparison mountain. It's tough. We're wired to see where we fit in the group. So this is where we can talk about another aspect: attention. What am I paying attention to? Because if I'm paying attention to other people, how I fit with other people, well, what other people am I comparing myself to? If I'm comparing, or if I'm focusing on or paying attention to what I don't have, if I can shift to paying attention to what I do have, I've now shifted away from envy towards gratitude. And this is a seemingly small change, but it is makes a big difference.
And it's tougher than it might sound too, because we could say just pay attention to more positive things or the good aspects of your financial lives or what you have and not compare yourself to other folks. But we live in a world that just puts everybody else's stuff in front of us on a daily basis through social media. So it feels like that sounds simplistic, but can be really challenging to do. And people might need to think about, how do we change our social media diet or our content diet? What are we consuming and how are we doing that? I think that's something that I know personally. I kind of get, it becomes automatic. I just start scrolling the same pages or listening to similar types of podcasts or what have you. And from time to time, it might be worth auditing and thinking about, where are we placing our attention? What are we taking in? And is it in the right place? Are we paying attention to the right things that'll serve us rather than make us feel bad or compared to others? So just a side note there.
And we can choose a better benchmark instead of using other people, because again, it's not other people. We don't compare ourselves to everybody on earth, because we're the top 1% if you're in the United States. We don't compare ourselves to everybody in the United States. We don't compare ourselves to everybody in our state. I compare myself to my friends on social media, probably. Keeping Up with the Joneses used to be your neighbors, the Joneses. And then came TV shows like Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous and MTV Cribs. And then all of a sudden, now we're seeing crazier versions of the Joneses. And now social media, we're seeing the curated lives of all of the friends that we have. Nobody posts how crappy their life is. People only post the good stuff. And sometimes they'll even post good things when they're having a bad day to try to, feel better about themselves and get likes. So I'm going to see that. I'm comparing myself. I know what it feels like to be me. I know what it feels like to be stressed out. And I'm comparing myself to a whole bunch of curated versions of what people want me to see. This is an unfair comparison. But what it does is now it says, well, they seem to have it together, so I'm going to start doing what they're doing. They're doing the same thing, though. They're looking around at their feed and saying, well, I need to do what those people are doing. So we're in this web of everybody's doing what everybody else is doing instead of focusing on us.
Yeah. And in your practice, Derek, I mean, one of the things that I see, I'd be curious your thoughts, when we take somebody through a financial planning process, one of the questions that I get most often is, how am I stacking up? Where should I be? Where are other people like me at this point in their financial lives? In some way, shape, or form, it's kind of, they're looking for professional validation of whether or not they're keeping up with the Joneses. I'm curious if you see that or have some thoughts, but it shows out in the work that we do. People come to us, and I think as I'm thinking about it again, they want us to validate or help them accept where they're at, but they always have their eye on something or someone else as a benchmark. It's interesting.
Yeah. So using our terminology from earlier, they're looking for help with acceptance, but they're doing that by placing their attention on other people's benchmarks. So you're right, professional validation. I like that. There's also some version of misery loves company. So how am I stacking up? Is the keeping up with the Joneses, but also if I'm feeling some kind of nervousness about, say, the stock market or my financial situation, I'm not saving as much. Do other people struggle with this too? Or am I the only one that struggles with this? So there's some other version of, please tell me this isn't just me. So it kind of works. There's two different parallel ways that kind of works.
Let me ask a question. Let's pause there, because I think this is really important and can be useful. How do we help people in those moments get their attention back on themselves? Do you have any quick tips or tricks there, about not only on themselves or the positive that they have? How do we help them kind of reshift their focus at that moment if they recognize that they're doing it, if they're thinking about others or comparing themselves? How would you recommend somebody shift their focus onto something more positive at that moment?
The quick version is to just simply ask questions or elicit information. So you're just nudging. You're focused over there. Think of when I was a kid, we had these little wind up robots, and the little thing would walk around the table, and it might be walking towards the edge of the table, and now you just push it a little bit so it stays on the table. Just a subtle hand to guide it somewhere else. So that's one thing that I've had a lot of success with. How do I stack up to other people? And I say, how important is it for you to feel like you stack up well to other people? that subtle mirror of, do you know, because this is an automatic question. That's probably the elephant. That's probably the system one asked that question. When you ask for more information in some way, it brings it up into the rider. It brings it up into conscious awareness. It's like holding up a mirror, I call it. Sometimes people will say, well, I guess that's a good point. Sometimes it's that easy. Sometimes people will dig in their heels and say, well, because I need to know, it's important for me to be the best or something like that. And that opens up a conversation about personal values, for example. What is it about being the person with the most jelly beans that's important to you? And it's just a process of continuing to ask questions until the true worry, the true concern, the true seed will come out at some point, because most people don't have a lot of practice with articulating these things, and they think, maybe if I compare myself to other people, or maybe if I knew where I fit, that will solve my problem, whatever my problem happens to be. But often it's never correct.
Yeah. So there's something underlying that's kind of bringing or bubbling that question up to the surface, because that's how they know how to get at the information, right? Is to try to compare, right? It's a natural phenomenon, but there's something else going on, some emotion or stress or anxiety that's causing it. So that's a good point. That's another topic we could probably go on a really long tangent down. So I don't want to sidetrack how we apply this. Any other thoughts? What other areas do you think of when you think about finances? How do we continue to apply mindfulness to our financial lives?
The element of mindful choice is important, because so many of us don't really know that we're making financial decisions, or decisions in general, but we'll say financial decisions. And being more aware of the financial decisions you're making helps you make a more intentional choice. So I call this living intentionally. There's a concept called the pain of paying. Paying should hurt. There should be a sting. There should be the pain of paying. We used to be aware, or we used to pay attention. We used to know that we were spending money. I think we're old enough to know that there was a time when we used to pay for things with paper called cash, and we would count out, how much is this thing? It's $42. I have to 20, 40, 1, 2, here you go. And I'd give a bunch of cash to somebody, and they'd give me different cash back and some metal coins. I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew how much I was spending. I probably knew how much was in my wallet. And then we got this piece of paper. We didn't use cash anymore. We just had a piece of paper that we wrote on. And we said, here, go see this bank, and they'll give you the money. But we had a little more esoteric, because it's the same piece of paper. You could write your check for $1, or you could write your check for $10,000 on the same piece of paper. But still, I had to write who I was paying. I had to write it in numbers. I had to write it in words. And then I wrote it in my register. I wrote the amount 3 times. Well, fast forward to today. Today, if I go to Subway for lunch and I go get my sandwich, and Jim's outside and he says, hey, Derek, surprise, I'm here. How much did you pay for your sandwich? It's very likely that I'd say, I don't know. I mean, I know I have some bounds. Like, I know it wasn't $1.50, and I know it wasn't $30. How much did I actually pay, though? I don't know. So it's gone, because on Amazon, I linked my credit card in Amazon years ago. And now I just click, and it comes in 2 days.
Mm-hmm. And now, again, Amazon is something that I harp on all the time. So not only is your credit card saved in the website, one-click buy now type purchasing, when you go to track it, even if you want to be aware of it, and say you're budgeting or you're doing some bookkeeping, some personal household bookkeeping, it just says Amazon as a transaction. So now I don't even know what it was. So the tendency is to kind of skip through that stuff quickly and get it done. So now I have to pause to go back to even remember what I spent the money on, let alone kind of feel that pain of paying that you mentioned before. That's just completely devoid of any kind of pain, because I don't even know what it is anymore once I'm presented with the transaction itself.
Yeah, so it multiplies. Same with, with the pandemic, Grubhub, I linked my account or my credit card to the account, and now it's tap, 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 and food's here in 30 minutes. I don't even know that I'm making a decision. It's automatic patterns. I reach for the phone, tap, tap, tap. I don't use Grubhub that often, but I know from other people who do that they just reflexively order food. They don't think, hey, I wonder if I should order food. I wonder if I should do this or not. They just do it. So
Mm.
the impulse and the action are really close together. So there is no mindful choice here.
So
This
what,
just happens.
my tendency is to say, as the, wise financial planner, that we should take our credit cards out of Amazon. You should have to enter that information every time. But then the consumer that I am, the real person that I am, says it's frustrating when it's not in there now. So if I open a browser that doesn't have that information saved, then I'm frustrated and annoyed because I want to take advantage of the, our modern technology to make life easier and simpler. So I don't know if you have a solution there, or is the practice of mindfulness, bringing that awareness to it. Is that what we're talking about here? Finding a way to practice some of these things so that you can just be conscious, so you can use the tools, but not let it get away from you, and you're still not losing that awareness.
Great, great question. And as with most things, the answer could be as long or as deep as we want. But
right.
There's an end goal that you can, or an end state that you can think about, and that is, with practice, you can just be more aware of what you're doing. I'm going on Amazon because I need this thing. Well, I've noticed now that I got distracted by one of their little ads. That's okay, because I actually did need that. They knew it better than me with their little algorithm. That's cool. Just, you're bringing awareness to it. I can still use the tool and be aware that I'm using the tool and still take advantage of the conveniences that come with having my address already in there and my payment method already in there and everything like that. But that's the end state. To get there, sometimes it's helpful to put guardrails up. Sometimes it's helpful to use little tactics, especially if you're more prone. There are people on a spectrum here. It's a bell curve. There are people for whom it's just a compulsion. I'm stressed out. Boom, I go to Amazon. That's automatic pattern, and it takes more work to break that. But I'm not making a conscious choice. It's just a way for me to alleviate stress. And then the things come. Then I feel what? I feel guilt. I feel shame. I feel embarrassed because now I have to go back to the UPS store all the time. The UPS person knows me by name now, and this is really embarrassing.
Yeah.
That's a hard pattern to get out of. So you can't just wake up and be in that end state.
And that's a good distinction. I'm glad you brought that up, that, some of these things, when you have stresses or anxieties, or you're building these habits or behaviors, there's something actually going on that you can work on. You can see a therapist, a financial therapist. There's a lot of outlets now for folks that, need to do some more intensive work. Or I guess more broadly, we're just talking about the regular day-to-day kind of routines that we get in and fall victim to. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. And to help, so some of those guardrails can be taking your credit card off. That induces friction, which induces the pain of paying. So reintroducing the pain of paying is helpful. This is why a lot of financial advice, from the brand name people, the big names, I won't name them, but they'll say, go all to cash, or put your credit cards into ICE, or put your cash into envelopes.
Right.
Those things can work, but they work because they reintroduce the pain of paying. So any way that you can reintroduce the pain of paying will be helpful. Taking your credit cards out, that means that, oh, shoot, now I got to go get my wallet and type this in. I've reintroduced the pain of paying. Now I know I'm making this decision. I've added friction. So now I'm only going to buy things if I actually need this thing. So another way to think about this is to implement a rule. I have a rule. So maybe an overnight rule or a 3-day rule. Put things in your cart or a list. If we're using Amazon as the example, make a list, the buy later list. And instead of putting things in the cart, put it in the list. And then go back in 3 days and see how many things that you don't want anymore. I've done this. And it's crazy to see how many things I went through and say, I don't even remember why I wanted that. Or do I really need this? Becomes a
or the problem's resolved itself, right, on its own. Yes. If you needed to solve a problem, you needed a problem, the leak fixed itself. It was, just some excess water, whatever, so that's a great idea. Would you agree, based on what we're talking about? I'm kind of thinking to myself that, in a weird kind of roundabout way, or maybe directly, it feels like budgeting, some form of bookkeeping where you're regularly looking at and tracking and categorizing your spending and transactions, that in itself is almost a form of a mindfulness practice and of becoming aware of your financial situation.
Yeah, because you're forcing yourself to pay attention to either what has happened if you're tracking, or what you plan to do if you're doing a budget beforehand. But you're bringing your attention to your finances, and
Mm,
that's step one. I think that's probably the 80-20 rule. That's the 20% of the stuff you need to do to get 80% of the
right.
benefit, is to start paying attention to the finances. And that's what
And
the
I
paying
don't
paying is
think
all about.
and I don't think as an industry we do enough job, or a good enough job, or spend enough time in that step. I think we have a tendency to want to rush into the sexier stuff, the investments and retirement planning, or whatever the case might be. But I feel like our clients need to spend more time there. And I think we need to do a better job of helping people be aware of their starting point. And I think we have a perception of where that might be, but we aren't really studying it. We're not backing that up with information often enough. So I feel like oftentimes in working with clients, when we don't have a lot of visibility and awareness of their current financial situation and where they're spending, that's not a great foundation to build a financial plan on, right? So I think it's a great kind of idea. I feel like I'm probably harping on budgeting, which is such a terrible, dirty word, so to speak. But it is worthwhile to spend some time thinking about, and what is that awareness that you have or don't on your current financial situation.
Yeah, well said. And there's various ways to pay more attention. And I like implementing rules for yourself. I have a rule that I put this thing in the cart for 2 days, or I have a rule that I check with my wife before I make a purchase over $100, or I have a rule that whatever it is, you can make up your own rules. And I've had some success with having clients, or having people in general, ask themselves this question: do I really need this? If you can, before any transaction, even the Subway sandwich that I talked about eating for lunch, or especially big purchases, but even the smaller ones, do I really need this? It's a great question, because you get to ask yourself this question multiple times, and you just emphasize a different word. Do I really need this? 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 And do I really need this? This is not a judgment inducing thing. You're just growing the space to make a mindful choice. You're growing the space between impulse and purchase here. And feel free to just speed through it and say yes to all of it if you want to. But what you're doing is you're cutting out potential purchasing regret. Or a
Mm-hmm.
similar question is to, if you're the kind of person who does feel buyer's remorse, before making a purchase, say, how will I feel tomorrow? Again, what you're doing is you're bringing this from the elephant into the rider. The elephant wants to just rush through and make this purchase, probably to alleviate some anxiety or some stress or something. And then tomorrow the rider wakes up and says, oh, why did we do this? We can't afford this, or we shouldn't have bought that, or we don't have room for this. So if we can ask ourselves, pay more attention, and have the rider say, how am I going to feel if I buy this tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great one to get ahead of any potential
Yeah.
future regret.
I didn't anticipate that we'd spend a lot of time talking about budgeting, but as we unpack this, I feel like there's just so much room for mindfulness in the act of budgeting, bookkeeping, whatever you want to call it, just being aware of our financial situation. So that's an interesting note to make note of. What else? What other ideas? Are there any other ways that you think of that we can apply mindfulness to our financial lives?
Yeah. So there's ways to, one antidote to breaking from the Joneses is to recognize that everybody has different values. I don't share the same values as the Joneses. If I can internalize that, if I can really, make that the core of who I am, recognizing that everybody has different values, now the social comparison game kind of drops away, because I don't value brand new cars. I value
Mm,
camping trailers, or I value hiking trips to the mountain. This person values European cruises or something. I don't have to compare myself to the European trips that my neighbor's taking, because I don't value that.
mm-hmm.
They don't need to worry about me going on a hiking trip to Colorado, because we have different values. So one way that I really love to help with aligning your use of money with what's important to you is I do a lot of work around this concept of financial purpose, which is answering the question, what is your money for? So we're going to break away from the common conception that money is a goal. In the financial planning profession, it's common to hear people say, well, my goal is my magic number is $3 million. I can retire as soon as I get $3 million, or I'll retire as soon as my portfolio gives me $75,000 of income per year, or I want to be part of this financially independent retire early movement and retire at 39. Okay, that's all using money as a goal. What are you going to do with $3 million or $75,000 a year? Or what are you going to do with the rest of your 4 decades if you retire at 39? Life comes first. Money is a tool. Money is an important tool. You have to know how to care for it and tend it. You have to care for it, but it's worthless by itself. Money can only be used for something. What's that something for you? Said another way, if you're listening to this, then I would wager that you could sell everything you own and you could move to a cheap country and you could survive. You could scrape by in a cheap country, but you don't want to just scrape by in a cheap country. You want something outside of just surviving.
Right.
What does that mean to you? And once I know what that means to me, I can say, okay, well then this tool for me means whatever. And I keep mine right here, actually laminate it. So money's purpose in my life is to help me live a simple, adventurous life and learn more about how the world works. This becomes a filter that I can use. If I'm going to make a purchase, I need to go get a Subway sandwich today. Does this help me live a simple, adventurous life and learn about how the world works? I don't know. Yes or no. We're not trying to induce a no or a yes. I'm just throwing the space between impulse and action. My neighbors are getting a Tesla and I really want a Tesla. Does buying a Tesla help me live a simple, adventurous life and learn more about how the world works? Again, get a lawyer, look for loopholes, try to get a yes, that's fine. Yeah. I'm just taking this impulsive decision and I'm making it an intentional decision.
I like that you've continued to describe that a little bit and gone a little bit further, because I think sometimes it's unfair to tell people that they need to identify perhaps, what they want out of life and what their values are without giving them a framework to do it. So actually writing out what your money is for is a great way of doing that and going a little bit deeper. So I'm glad you were willing to share that. And because I think it's an important point. I think we need to give people the practice of or an exercise or a tool or a framework to be able to implement the things that we're asking them to do. And I think oftentimes we just say, well, tell us about what are your, no one sits around talking about, what are our values very often. I don't anyway. Right. Or what's your purpose, right? What is your money for is such a great way to kind of get at it, right? What would you do with the money? How would you spend your time? So I'm glad you shared that. Thank you.
Yeah. And it subtly gets away. So remember, money's a tool, it's not a goal. But it also kind of subtly highlights the fact that there's not really any financial goals. There's life goals that have a price. And I guess that's kind of what a financial goal is, how I'm going to pay for a life goal. So once we can start to see that, then we don't let people say, my goal is to retire at 65. What does that mean? What are you going to do after that? What are you going to do until that? Why 65? Well, because I hate my job and I'm 62 now and I got to hurry up and retire. Well, what if you changed careers and you did something that you loved and you can do that until 75? I mean, that's an option too. So what is it that you want out of this life?
And I think, going back to where we started, being on autopilot, I think it's easy for us all to kind of fall into our routines and not spend some time thinking about all this, right? And we kind of get locked into doing things we don't like and and then we make decisions like you just described of retiring early. That might not be the right decision or answer, right? It just might be recalibrating what you're doing to the things that, bring you some joy and you're happy doing. So, again, there's just so many ways that we can apply mindfulness to our lives, to our financial lives in particular. So there's so many questions I want to ask, but I'm afraid that we'll go down some other long tangent rabbit hole. Is there any final thoughts? Is there anything you want to make sure we touch on related to this before I let you go and ask you some last final questions?
I think just recognizing that we dropped a lot of stuff on you today. So it takes practice. It takes practice to implement some of these things. It takes practice to learn some of these things. And that's okay, right? So gratitude for where you are while working for what you want, that is okay. And again, it takes practice because you're fighting. Maybe fighting is too strong a word, but you're wired to see how I fit in this group. How that manifests today in today's world is social comparison. But if you can recognize, well, everybody's got different values. Our money is for something different. You can start paying attention to your financial decisions, your financial life. You can accept what is while working for what you want. And you can grow the space between impulse and action and start making more intentional, mindful choices. That is a place that you can work towards. And you might never get there. I'm not there. Like, there's no end stop here. This is something that you're always working on. So give yourself permission to just practice some of these things and work on it a little bit here and a little bit there, with the idea of being more aware of your financial life and your life in general.
It's great. Great advice. A lot there. Would you recommend, off the top of your head, not to put you on the spot, any books, authors in general, websites, podcasts in and around mindfulness? Where would people go from here if they wanted to continue to learn about mindfulness?
Sure. There could be a whole episode on this. So authors that you might like, Jon Kabat-Zinn. He is the person who is credited with bringing mindfulness to the West and stripping the religious aspect out of it. So having kind of a secular version of mindfulness. So Jon Kabat-Zinn has written several books. Thich Nhat Hanh, the late Thich Nhat Hanh, I don't know, a guy just, all he did was write books. There's a lot of books out there by him. He's I think Vietnamese mindfulness
coincidentally expert. I was just in a
those two are great.
Used bookstore here in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and little kind of hole in the wall place that turned out to be just the gem that we stumbled into. And I was kind of looking around, and this place wasn't that big, but I turned around and there was literally a whole wall in front of me of Thich Nhat Hanh. So tons of content with that name. So that's a good share.
Yeah, a lot of good content. And then a guy named Sam Harris he's a great author. And then in terms of apps, the big ones are Calm and totally blanking on Headspace. It's Headspace. Those are the two big ones. I use Waking Up. That's Sam Harris's app. Lots of content on there. The Mindfulness app is another one that I use. 10% Happier is an app by Dan Harris. He also wrote a book called 10% Happier.
That's a great book. Yeah, I would jump in real quick and just say that if you're interested in how it might be applied, mindfulness, meditation specifically in that case, to your life and the benefits, that's a good one to start with.
He really hits on, in that book, the sometimes pushback that says, oh, mindfulness is all woo-woo and I don't want to be taken advantage of. Well, he really hits that point hard. It doesn't mean you're going to get taken advantage of. And then, so he uses Joseph Goldstein is a great teacher. He's written some books, but he's an amazing mindfulness teacher. If you stumble upon any courses that he's done, he's in the Mindfulness app. He's in 10% Happier. Joseph Goldstein's all over the place. So he's a great teacher. Don't think I'm missing out on much. I have a master class that I teach if people are
that's great segue. Where do people check you out?
Easiest place is meaning.blog. That's where I write a weekly column on money's role in a meaningful life. And on that same website, there's an area for master classes, and I have a mindfulness master class that you can check out.
Perfect. One last question. In the areas outside of personal finance, or in this case, your background, mindfulness, are there any areas of well-being that you think of that you go to on a regular basis? It could be a habit, an exercise, a ritual that helps you feel better in another area of your life.
I think just generally thinking about well-being, exercise is, I think, the go-to. I mean, it's almost like the cure for so many
The cure
problems.
all, right?
Not only
The
does it make
magic
you more
pill.
fit, but yeah, absolutely. It feeds all other areas of your life. It makes you feel better, and it doesn't need to be some kind of intense workout. And in fact, so the tip I give is try to find something that doesn't feel like a chore. Try to find something that doesn't feel like exercise. So if you can find something that's fun, now you've tricked yourself into working out. So for example, I play
Mm,
squash 3 to 4 times a week, and that's just fun. It's a crazy workout, but I don't do it for the workout. I do it to actually play the game. And for some
right.
people, it's pickleball or tennis, and some people run
Yeah.
for fun
I
or
was
bike
thinking of
riding or
pickleball.
going on
Yeah.
walks, getting a dog.
Yeah.
So trick
That's
yourself into
great.
working out by finding something that is a game.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you again, Derek, for being here. You're just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to mindfulness. I appreciate your expertise and being willing to take some time to help us dig into some of this stuff. It's a really deep ocean, so there's a ton to explore. We just really scratched the surface. So I'd encourage people to check out some of the books and some of the apps that Derek mentioned. We'll link to all that stuff. And so thanks again. Thanks for listening.